They said I wouldn't do it. They said I was crazy. Who said that? No one, I'm gonna be honest. But I did it. I watched an anime that was recommended to me by one of the commenters on my video. I mentioned last week that the first anime that I was gonna be watching for this series for your favorite anime is one called ReLIFE. And it was recommended to me by user High Quality Trash. Now, sir, that is a terrible name to give yourself because you did not recommend me High Quality Trash. In fact, you didn't recommend me trash at all. You should only keep the first part of your name. You recommended me some high quality stuff. At least I found it high quality. So the anime they recommended me was ReLIFE. Now, going into ReLIFE, I didn't know much about it. I didn't really know what it was about. All I could tell really was that it was like a slice of life anime with maybe some like romance elements to it. And it was pretty obvious there was gonna be a slice of life, which it is, but it's a little bit more than that. And I'll delve into that later. But to give you kind of a quick synopsis of the anime, ReLIFE is pretty much about a 27-year-old NEET named Kaizaki who is currently unemployed. He is working part-time at like a convenience store, but obviously he wants to get a better job. He quit his previous job after 3 months, which makes it only harder for him to find a new job, especially in like Japan, which apparently like working conditions are terrible. It's really just hard to get a job in general. But he's approached by this like businessman sort of who pretty much tells him, hey, I work for this company called ReLIFE, and essentially we have a program that will make you 10 years younger, and we will enroll you in high school again. So he's sending you back to high school in order to rehabilitate you so that you can be a little bit more social and you can stop being a NEET when you're a grown-up. So originally Kaizaki's kind of hesitant about this. He's not really sure if it's something he wants to go through, but ultimately he does, obviously, or else we wouldn't have the anime. And so the whole ReLIFE program essentially means that for 1 year he's going to attend school, and in that 1 year he's going to try to do his best to change, be involved, be a little bit more active, more social. And I want to get to the story in a bit, but I just want to say that this anime was actually incredibly good. I honestly did not really expect to like it as much as I did. I'm not really the biggest fan of slice of life animes, especially ones that kind of involve sort of this like go back to high school or like more high school setting. I think as I've grown older, I've kind of stopped being able to relate to that because I'm not in high school anymore. But little did I know that the premise was gonna touch my very soul, because I really related to the premise. Like I mentioned, he is a 27-year-old who is kind of just a little bit lost. He doesn't know what to do. Now, funnily enough, I'm gonna be 27 this year, so that aspect resonated with me. Not in the sense that I'm incredibly lost or anything like that. I think I'm pretty much going in a decent direction in my life. But one of the main things of ReLIFE is essentially like this theme about change. And in different parts of your life, you're gonna experience change way more, say in this age range, than you will in like another age range. And so that resonated with me because as I grow older, I just feel like I'm sort of getting to the routine of things, which I think is something that like you can probably anticipate when you get older, versus when you're a kid or specifically a teenager, you're doing things all the time, whether it's like you're at school, you're participating in like clubs, stuff like that, school events, you start meeting new people, right? That stuff is a lot harder to do when you're older, but not that it's impossible, it's just harder, right? And I do like that aspect about ReLIFE where it kind of takes a very adult approach to this idea of change and then applying it to sort of like high schoolers. One of the things I was really concerned with was when Kaizaki went back to high school, he would just act like a high schooler. So I was really glad when throughout the show, he's actively helping people within his now new age range because he is older. He's experienced these things and he knows the value of experiencing these things when you're young versus when you're old. Because when you're old, and here I am thinking 27 is old. It's not, it's still young. Those experiences just become a lot less unless you create them on your own, which is one of the things that like they talk about a lot in ReLIFE, which is one of the reasons why they have this program, because it's kind of like a reminder that, hey, like these experiences still exist, even though they're not as readily available in high school. You just have to find them and you have to do them. And unless you are willing to do that, willing to change yourself and experience that change and growth, then you're just going to remain the same. And again, Kaizaki using this experience helps out a lot of the characters. Because he's older, he's a lot wiser. So when a character's having doubts about them, he can kind of be that voice of reason where he's saying like, look, you still have a ton of life ahead of you. It's fine if you just do this thing, and you should do this thing, cherish those. Make those memories, right? And so I really like that whole theme of change. I think it really resonated with me, especially like now that I'm older, and I do agree that like it is harder to do things once you're older, but that shouldn't stop you from trying to do new things and or experience new things. because you really haven't experienced it at all, right? Like the world's a big place. So I really love that aspect about it. The story is also really good, even though the whole main theme of the story is like a change. That's not necessarily like the plot of the story, and the story doesn't really have like a grand plot that is achieved, you know. The main plot is essentially Kaizaki has to spend the year in high school, and from there just kind of learn about things. And so all the events that happen are in service of that plot. Whatever happens in that year, that's essentially what is happening. But what the ultimate end goal is, which is one of the reasons why he originally joins, is that the prospect of a new job once he is done with this year program. And I like that there's a lot of plot elements to it. Like it definitely seems like there's different storylines happening at the same time. And most of the time the story just focuses on one, and then it resolves it, then it moves on to the next one, and it resolves it. And then there's like the main plot that's sort of being strung in the background, which is a structure that I really like. Because throughout this whole thing, Kaizaki does have some kind of trauma, and we don't know what that trauma is until later down the line. So that's sort of the background plot that's happening, where the forefront plot is usually like these character interactions and how they react to each other. So let's talk about the characters, because there is like a decent amount of characters, and they're all very likable, which is really hard to do in a slice of life, in my opinion. I think a lot of slice of lives tend to fall into character tropes, where each character just kind of is a certain trope and then they just never really grow out of it. But again, in real life, the theme is change, and a lot of these characters are not the same characters when they're introduced early on. And this is only like a 17 episode anime, so to see like the character progression throughout the anime is really good, in my opinion. Kaizaki is actually a likable character, and I'm so glad that this is not necessarily spoilers, but just the general thing that's like good to know. One thing that I was worried about them handling is essentially he's a 27-year-old man who turns 17. By the way, he doesn't go back in time or anything like that. He just literally has the body of a 17-year-old, and he's in school. Same year, same thing. He just looks younger. But what's funny is that even though he looks younger, he's actually not, like, physically he's not younger. He's still a 27-year-old, and because he's like a smoker and a drinker, he's just like terrible at sports, which is something that I'm glad they kept in. But yeah, one of the things I was worried that they were gonna do is kind of introduce like this dilemma that he would constantly be having, which is like having an attraction towards like the teenagers, which I'm happy that they address it, because it's an obvious thing they have to address. But I think the way they handle it is really well done. Kaizaki is not a creep. In fact, he himself, when he thinks like, oh, this girl's attractive, he's just like, wait, no, that's so weird. I'm like 10 years older than this person. And so I'm glad that it has that self-awareness, and that it pokes at it, so that as a viewer, I'm just like, I mean, like, how can I root for the main character when he's like into 17-year-olds? You know, so I'm really glad that they address that, and he's not a creep. He's very well aware that he is way older than them, and instead of like trying to be creepy about it, he really tries to like maintain his distance, as well as just, if there is some sort of like intimacy, it's from him being sort of a more mature presence and mature person, and offering like help in that way. He gives very like emotional advice, which I think is really interesting. We have like our main we have like our main 6 characters, I believe. So we have Kaizaki, we have Hishiro, which is best girl. Then we have Ryo, who is the support ReLIFE agent, the one who pretty much goes around tracking Kaizaki's progress, which is one thing that also happens. Like, the ReLIFE agent, Ryo, he pretty much stalks Kaizaki. Not really. He's just a student at the same school, and pretty much like keeps track of his progress, right? We have Ryo, and then we also have another character named Onoya, and then Oga, and then Karyu. I think the 7th one is Honoka. There are 2 other characters that are pretty prevalent. They're like Honoka's friends, but they're never really like brought to the forefront like the other 6 are. And these 7 characters I think are really well done. Hishiro has like the most development, because she's essentially like the female lead next to Kaizaki. And Ryo and Onoya, they show up a lot. Ryo especially, just because he is like the support agent for Kaizaki, so he's just around all the time. Oga, probably like my favorite like best boy in the show, just because he's really funny, and he's really dense too. Like, he just does not get human like emotion at all. Like, he does not pick up on like these human signals that they're sending him, so that was really funny. Karyu, now I really like Karyu towards the end. In the beginning, she was insufferable. I did not like her at all. And Honoka, she was really cool. I just generally liked her, and her story was also very interesting, and sort of like what she had to deal with. And so it was really nice to me to see that they're like all these characters. I mentioned that Hishido has the most development, but I would also say Karyu, which is like the redheaded chick, she has probably the third most development out of all of them, mostly just because she had 2 different arcs focused on her, and from there she really like grows as a person. Now again, I didn't like her just because, in all fairness, I think she is a very relatable person, and once you get her story, you can understand where she's coming from. But god damn, she was pissing me off in like the first few episodes, because it's like, without delving into spoilers, she causes all her own problems, and then pretty much all of her problems are fixed by someone else. And I didn't like that, because it's like, if you are the center of the problem, you should take responsibility. But again, these are high schoolers, they are immature, so obviously that plays into it. But I'm really glad that once she finally gets her character development, she keeps it. It doesn't like go away. Now, this eventually does become a romance anime, which I thought was going to be a little weird. Now, I'm really happy that they kind of gave you little tidbits and nuggets throughout the entire show to understand like how this romance actually comes to work. And it's not just romance with like one character, it's actually multiple characters. But I think the romance really works well. And as a romance anime, I'm really glad how subtle they do like these more important moments that would happen in other romance animes. You know, like, there's that whole thing about like they're holding hands. That's always like a big deal, right? There is like a festival, right? Like a fireworks festival, and that's usually like a big thing. And those romance moments are so understated, and they're just kind of handled very casually, in my opinion, which is not a detriment at all. I love that choice, because I feel like a lot of other romance animes try to create like this whole bombastic feeling of romance, when I feel like that's a very idealistic way to portray it. Whereas ReLIFE, I think, portrays romance in a more realistic way, where it is a much more intimate thing. It is like a moment that you savor with your significant other. And so all these romance elements that happen with even the different characters that experience the romance elements of this anime is very subtle, and I really like that about it. I feel like it's really hard for an anime to not go for this like grandiose reveal of romance and stuff like that, right? And then they focus more on like these other aspects of romance that, when they happen, just hit way harder. I'm not gonna lie, I teared up at the end. Actually, I teared up multiple times at the end. And I think it's because the romance was so understated. They focused so much more on these other emotional moments, which I loved. Now, I wouldn't say this is necessarily a comedy. There's a lot of funny elements in it. I really like how the characters, like when they turn chibi, they look fairly unique. They don't look like anything. And then I learned that this was actually a webtoon, or at least a manga in a webtoon style, at least is what I read. And you can definitely see that when the characters turn chibi, they don't look like a traditional chibi, like a Japanese chibi character. They look very Korean. And I like it when I was watching it, it felt off, not in a bad way, but in a way that I just noticed. But I really thought that like the whole styling of it, now I will say, like, it doesn't have the best animation. Like, it does a fine job, but realistically, like, that's not even like, don't fucking worry about it. Like, honestly, like, the animation is like the least of your worries. You should really focus on like the characters and the story that's happening. Like, if I had one criticism, it would have to be the animation. But like, in terms of that being a detriment to the anime, it's really not. Like, the anime still is good. And I'll say it one more time, I'm actually like pretty happy that this was like the first one I watched, just because the message resonated a lot with me, especially the premise. And so, at least for my own personal reasons why I liked it, it's because it kind of made me feel better of where I am currently, and sort of gave me an idea of what I should be doing, or at least gave me that message that even though I'm older and I'm gonna experience change a lot less now than I did when I was younger, that it's still possible. And so this is a really good anime. In fact, if you are in your late 20s, and or if you are between like 16 to 18, I would recommend watching this anime. If you're like 20 to 25, still watch it. It's really good. But I feel like the message would hit harder if you are pretty much within that age range that the show gives you, which is like late 20s to early, like late teens. But again, I cannot recommend it enough. Thank you, High Quality Trash, for recommending me this anime. I really loved it. And I'm really not just saying that, like, this anime was something that like I felt was special. And I can understand why it's your favorite anime. And I want to at least give you the validation that you have a good recommendation. So when you recommend this to fucking people, send them straight to this fucking video to kind of understand why it's a good anime. But yeah, again, thank you for recommending me that anime. That's pretty much it from me. If you like the video, like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want. I'm not your parent. And that's pretty much it. Peace.